On the morning of January the 27th, a retired Green Beret named Clint Bernell walked into a gym on Owen Drive in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and worked out beside the woman he had been married to for years. Nothing about the moment looked like an ending. He was 50 years old, built like the soldier he had been for most of his adult life, and by every outward measure, he was starting over. He had survived deployments most people can't imagine. He had traded a combat uniform for a backpack and a stack of textbooks, chasing a second career as a physician assistant. And on that particular morning, he told his wife something he had also told her the night before. Their marriage was over. He wanted a divorce. He left the gym in his own car. She left in hers. He told her he was headed to Methodist University to study for a test. That was the last time Shauna Cloud says she saw her husband alive. 24 hours later, Clint Bernell did not show up for class. His book bag, his laptop, his car keys, everything he would have needed for an ordinary Tuesday, were sitting exactly where he'd left them, inside the home he shared with his wife. And when deputies came to check on him, the woman he had told he wanted out of the marriage stood in the doorway and calmly said she hadn't seen him since the day before. 29 days later, a passerby would call 911 about something floating in a pond 3 miles from that house. What they found had no head, no arms, no legs, just a torso, unclothed, resting 8 feet from the shoreline. This is the story of a special forces medic who spent his life running toward danger for other people. And the wife, prosecutors say, made sure he never got the chance to walk away from her. I'm Brian, and this is Brian's Criminal Unmasking. Before we go further into this one, I need you to do something for me. This case has more twists than almost anything I've covered on this channel. A secret girlfriend, a missing head, a road trip to another state, and evidence that was sitting in a lake for nearly a month before anyone found it. If true crime stories like this keep you up at night in the best way, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because you are not going to want to miss how this one unravels. All right, let's get into it. To understand how strange this case is, you have to understand who Clint Bernell was before any of this happened. He wasn't some ordinary guy caught up in a domestic dispute that spiraled out of control. Clint Bernell was a retired member of the United States Army Special Forces, a Green Beret. For most of his career, he served as a medic, the kind of soldier whose entire job is keeping other people alive in the worst conditions imaginable. Green Berets are trained for unconventional warfare, for operating in hostile territory with almost no support, for making split-second decisions when someone's life is on the line. Bernell did that job for years, likely across multiple deployments, before he transitioned out of active service. And when he came home for good, he didn't slow down. He enrolled in the Physician Assistant program at Methodist University in Fayetteville, North Carolina, a demanding competitive course of study that would let him keep doing what he'd always done, just in a hospital instead of a battlefield. He was 50 years old and rebuilding his entire professional identity from the ground up. Classmates and university staff would later describe a man who was present, engaged, and reliable. Reliable enough that when he simply didn't show up to class one Tuesday morning, it set off alarm bells almost immediately. That's not a small detail. People who knew Clint Bernell understood almost instinctively that something was wrong the moment he went quiet. At home, though, a very different story had apparently been unfolding for some time. Bernell was married to Shauna Cloud, also 50, a woman with a nursing background who had worked as a traveling nurse. Traveling nurses take short-term contracts at hospitals and medical facilities across the country, which often means long stretches away from home, unpredictable schedules, and a career built on constant motion. On paper, it's a demanding but respectable profession. Behind the scenes of this marriage, prosecutors would later argue, it was also the profile of someone who understood medical procedure, understood how bodies work, and they allege, understood how to make one disappear. By January of this year, Clint Bernell had reportedly reached a breaking point in the marriage. According to his girlfriend, Kelly Edwards, Bernell had been telling her for some time that he planned to leave his wife. Edwards would later tell reporters that she'd noticed unsettling patterns emerge in Bernell's life as their relationship deepened. The kind of quiet tension that builds when someone is living two separate lives, one that's falling apart and one he's trying to build with somebody new. Edwards has said Bernell didn't talk about his wife much in the early days of their relationship, but as time went on, it became clear he was preparing to end his marriage for good. And on January the 27th, he did exactly what he'd apparently been planning. According to investigators, Bernell went to see an attorney that day to discuss filing for divorce. Later that same day, he told his wife directly, for what may not have been the first time, but what would turn out to be the last, that he wanted out. Hours later, he was gone. Here's where the timeline gets tight and where investigators say the story stopped adding up. On the morning of January the 27th, Clint Bernell and Shauna Cloud were both at Fit for Life, a gym on Owen Drive in Fayetteville. According to what Cloud herself told investigators, the two of them worked out and then left separately in their own vehicles. She said her husband told her he was heading to Methodist University to study. That's the last confirmed sighting of Clint Bernell alive, given by his own wife. Cell phone records obtained later by investigators tell a different part of the story. According to court documents, those records show that Bernell came home that night and never left the house again. Think about that for a moment. A man who was, by every account, actively planning his exit from his marriage, who had seen a divorce attorney that very day, who had already been building a life with someone else, comes home on the night of January the 27th and simply vanishes from the world. No more calls, no more movement, no more Clint. The next morning, January the 28th, was the day everything should have looked normal and instead looked very wrong, very fast. Bernell was scheduled for class in the physician assistant program. He didn't show. For a man who had reportedly been elected to a position of trust among his classmates and who took his coursework seriously, missing class without a word was completely out of character. A university employee noticed and requested a wellness check. When Cumberland County deputies arrived at the home Bernell shared with his wife, they encountered Shauna Cloud. According to the sheriff's office, she told them she hadn't seen her husband since the day before. But right there in plain view were the things a man doesn't leave behind if he walks away on his own. His car, still in the driveway, his car keys, his school book bag, his laptop. Everything a person needs for an ordinary day, sitting untouched, while the person who owns them was nowhere to be found. And Shauna Cloud did not file a missing person report. Later that same evening, a second wellness check request came in. This one from Kelly Edwards, Bernell's girlfriend. The next day, January the 29th, it was Edwards who officially filed the missing persons report that got law enforcement moving in earnest. Not the wife of 16-plus years who'd shared a home with him. The girlfriend. That distinction would end up mattering enormously as the investigation developed. If you want to understand how investigators started looking hard at Shauna Cloud, you don't need forensic evidence yet. You just need to compare how the two women in Clint Bernell's life reacted to him going silent. Kelly Edwards raised the alarm. She pushed for a welfare check. When Bernell didn't answer her, she didn't wait around. She went to police and made it official. Reporters would later describe her as devastated, someone who had to sit through court hearings just feet away from the woman accused of killing the man she loved. In interviews, Edwards described Bernell as highly intelligent, someone who tried to see the best in everyone around him, a trait she said was a strength, but also, in hindsight, maybe a vulnerability. Shauna Cloud, meanwhile, told deputies she simply hadn't seen her husband since the previous day, and she did not file a missing person report of her own. She'd been the last person confirmed to see him alive at that gym on Owen Drive. She'd told him goodbye as he supposedly drove off to study, and then, according to what prosecutors would later lay out in court, she offered almost nothing to help find him. Investigators didn't take her account at face value for long. Search warrants followed. Deputies searched the home Bernell and Cloud shared, along with her vehicle and her cell phone. And on January the 31st, just 3 days after Bernell was reported missing. Deputies searching that home found something that changed the entire nature of the case. Inside Clint Bernell's own book bag and inside his laptop were bullet holes, not damage from an accident, not wear and tear. 2 distinct gunshot holes straight through his school bag and his computer, the exact items sitting untouched in his own home the morning deputies first arrived. Whatever happened to Clint Bernell, it happened where his things were. It happened at home. By this point, investigators were no longer treating this as a missing persons case. This was a homicide investigation, and Shauna Cloud was the person they were building it around. If you're still with me at this point, drop a comment down below that says, "I'm still here." I want to see who's actually locked into this story, because we're about to get into the part of this case that turned a missing persons investigation into one of the most disturbing homicide cases Cumberland County has seen in years. Before we go there, what's your gut telling you right now? Do you think Shauna Cloud planned this the moment she found out her husband was leaving, or do you think this was a moment that spiraled completely out of control? Type it in the comments. Let's keep going. With bullet holes found in Bernell's belongings and no explanation from his wife, investigators started digging into digital evidence, cell phone data, location history, anything that could tell them where Shauna Cloud had actually been in the days after her husband disappeared. What they found was damning. According to electronic records obtained by law enforcement, on January the 29th, one day after investigators believe Clint Bernell was killed, Shauna Cloud's phone traveled down a specific road. That road led to a pond. Her phone showed her stopping there for approximately 15 minutes, positioned roughly 60 feet from a specific spot along the water's edge. At the time, nobody knew what significance that spot would come to have. There was no body found yet. No case had been made public connecting that pond to anything. But months later, when investigators finally recovered human remains from that exact body of water, that 15-minute stop on January the 29th became one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case. Detectives didn't stop at North Carolina's borders either. On February the 1st, just days into the investigation, detectives traveled to Virginia. With help from Virginia State Police, they executed search warrants on Cloud's vehicle, on a rental property connected to her, and on her cell phone. Why Cloud had ties to a rental property in Virginia and what investigators were hoping to find there has never been fully explained in public reporting. But the fact that a homicide investigation into a North Carolina disappearance had already crossed state lines within a week tells you how quickly this case escalated and how seriously investigators were taking the evidence against her. For nearly a month, though, there was no body, no confirmation of the worst. Just an active duty investigation, a grieving girlfriend, a devastated family, and a wife who had gone quiet. Then, on February the 25th, everything changed. A homeowner along Gayley Road, a rural stretch about 3 miles from the house Clint Bernell had shared with his wife, placed a call to 911. There was something in the pond behind their home, a body floating roughly 8 feet from the shoreline. When authorities arrived, what they recovered was almost too horrific to describe. It was a human torso. No head, no arms, no legs. The remains were unclothed, and due to their condition, investigators could not make an immediate identification. The Cumberland County District Attorney, Billy West, would later stand in front of a judge and describe it in blunt terms. It was a horrific case and a terrible condition for a body to be found in. The remains were sent to the North Carolina State Crime Lab, where a DNA profile was developed. From there, that profile was forwarded to the Armed Forces Medical Examiner System, the federal agency responsible for identifying military remains, which had DNA already on file for Clint Bernell from his years of service. It was a fitting, almost tragic irony. The same military system that exists to identify soldiers lost overseas was the one that would ultimately confirm that a Green Beret had been murdered in his own community and dismembered in a pond 3 miles from his front door. On March the 28th, the confirmation came back. The remains recovered from that Gayley Road pond belonged to Clint Bernell. That same day, deputies arrested Shauna Cloud at her home and charged her with first-degree murder and concealment of a death. An autopsy performed by the North Carolina Office of the Chief Medical Examiner would later reveal exactly what had been done to him. The cause of death was ruled multiple gunshot wounds, 4 of them, all entering through his back, each one exiting through his chest. No bullets or fragments were ever recovered from the wounds themselves. The report also documented clear signs that the body had been dismembered using a mechanical saw. Investigators noted a 10-inch gash across the abdomen, and multiple organs were found to be missing from the torso entirely. A toxicology screening turned up no alcohol or drugs in his system. Whatever happened to Clint Bernell that night, he faced it with a clear head. To this day, his head, arms, and legs have never been recovered. When Shauna Cloud made her first court appearance, prosecutors laid out the case against her in granular, damning detail. District Attorney Billy West told the court that evidence pointed to Cloud in the shooting death of her husband on the morning of January the 28th, the very day he was supposed to be sitting in class. West reminded the judge that Cloud and Bonnell had been together at the gym that morning, that Bonnell had then intended to go to Methodist University, and that cell phone evidence showed he never actually left his own home again that night. Assistant District Attorney Rob Thompson walked the judge through the physical evidence. The 2 gunshot holes in Bonnell's book bag and laptop, discovered during the search of the home, which matched the pattern of the bullet wounds later found on his torso. Thompson also detailed the digital trail, Cloud's phone traveling to the exact road leading to the pond on January the 29th, stopping there for 15 minutes, mere feet from where her husband's remains would eventually be discovered nearly a month later. West added that investigators also had video evidence placing Cloud in the area near where the torso was recovered. And prosecutors made a point of telling the judge something else, something that, in a case built heavily on circumstantial and forensic evidence, spoke volumes about consciousness of guilt. Shauna Cloud never filed a missing person report for her own husband. The girlfriend did. Twice, community members and university officials had to push for wellness checks because the one person who should have been most desperate to find Clint Bonnell said almost nothing at all. The judge denied Cloud bond. She has remained in custody at the Cumberland County Detention Center, facing the possibility of capital punishment. Her defense attorney, James McRae Jr., has firmly maintained her innocence, telling reporters outside the courthouse that Shauna Cloud is innocent and looks forward to her day in court. It's important to remember, as we go through the rest of this story, that Shauna Cloud has been charged. She has not been convicted. Under the law, she is presumed innocent unless and until a jury says otherwise, and this case has not yet gone to trial. Clint Bonnell's family has not stayed silent either. In the days after the identification was confirmed, a spokesperson for the family released a statement saying the Bonnell family was beyond devastated, describing Clint as an incredible human being who sacrificed enormously for others and dedicated his life to making the world better. His sister, Stephanie Firkins, sat through Cloud's bond hearing, separated from the woman accused of killing her brother by nothing more than a pane of glass. Reporting from that hearing noted that Cloud never so much as looked in her direction. Away from the criminal case, there was also a scramble over what Clint Bonnell left behind. Days after his torso was discovered, a civil lawsuit erupted over control of his assets, the home he'd shared with Cloud, 2 vehicles, and a bank account. That lawsuit was voluntarily dismissed the same day Cloud was formally arraigned on the murder charge, as the criminal case took full priority. Not long after, a Cumberland County grand jury returned an indictment against her, and more recently, Cloud has asked the court for a new court-appointed attorney, indicating she intends to part ways with her originally hired defense team. The investigation, as far as the public record shows, is still active. Investigators say they are still searching for the rest of Clinton Bonnell's body. His head, his arms, and his legs remain missing to this day. There is something almost unbearably cruel about how this story ends, or rather, about where it currently stands. Clint Bernell survived deployments most of us will never fully understand. He spent years of his life as a Special Forces medic, trained to save people in the most hostile environments on Earth, trained to face down danger most human beings will never encounter. He came home. He didn't retreat into a quiet life. He pushed himself into a demanding graduate program, determined to spend the next chapter of his life helping people as a physician assistant, just as he had helped soldiers as a combat medic. And after surviving all of that, prosecutors allege that the person who ended his life was the woman he'd spent over 16 years married to, in his own home on an ordinary Tuesday, hours after he'd finally worked up the courage to tell her their marriage was over. If the allegations against Shauna Cloud are proven true in a court of law, this becomes a story about what happens when someone refuses to let another person simply walk away. Clint Bernell didn't want a confrontation. According to everyone around him, he wanted a new beginning, a divorce, a new relationship, a new career healing people instead of treating battlefield wounds. Instead, his family says, his story ended in a pond 3 miles from his own front door. His remains so thoroughly concealed that months later, investigators are still searching for the rest of him. A man who spent his life running toward danger to save others may have been killed by the one person who was supposed to be safest to come home to. That's the story of Clint Bernell, a decorated Green Beret, a devoted student, a man who thought telling his wife the truth about his marriage would be the hardest part of moving on with his life. Instead, prosecutors say it triggered the events that ended it. Shauna Cloud remains behind bars without bond, awaiting trial on charges of first-degree murder and concealment of a death. And this investigation is still ongoing as authorities continue searching for the rest of Clint Bernell's remains. If this case had you locked in from the very first line, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Share this video with somebody who needs to hear this story, and if you haven't already, subscribe to Brian's Criminal Unmasking so you never miss a case like this one again. And I want to know what you think. Do you believe the evidence prosecutors have laid out tells the whole story here, or do you think there's more to this case than we know so far? Drop your theory in the comments below. I read every single one. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next case.